Welcome to the Coffee with COVID-19 podcast. My name is Patrick Rolfe, and this is an ongoing media project where we use conversations with some of the leading entrepreneurs and thinkers within the coffee industry to try to understand a sustainable way through living together with our new reality, COVID-19. Welcome everyone. It's time for episode 6 of this podcast series where we're discussing coffee with COVID-19. Basically trying to understand what is going on in the industry throughout the whole part of the value chain. And for this episode, we have Lisa with us from Glasgow, from Dear Green Coffee Roasters. And we're super excited to kind of get your perspective on this and get a bit more insight in what's happening in your part of the world. How are you today?
Sure, I'm all right. Yeah, I've had a busy day, but yeah, I'm okay. I'm glad to be sitting down and chatting to you. So yeah, all good.
Super. Very happy to have you here as well. We actually, which is kind of, I just thought about this, but we met in London.
Yeah.
Right before this, or right in the start of this, right? We were both visiting a mutual client of us. And this was, right in the very, very beginning. And I think it's, at least for me, that was also before I started to understand the bigger picture of what was actually going on, right?
Yeah.
But
I remember well. I remember it's the last time I shook someone's hand.
I mean, yeah, definitely, right? And that's amazing. It's there's so many different parts of what we do on a daily basis, at least from my perspective, that has completely changed, right? And last time shook someone's hand, that's about right for me as well, right? And that's crazy when you think about it, right? I remember we discussed how you were getting back from the meeting to kind of back home, right? If the planes were actually still running, right? And how how we travel, right? Which it's very important questions for now as well, right?
Yeah.
On the kind of context of that, like where did you actually hear about this for the first time? Like where were you, and then what was your kind of initial thoughts on? Did you believe this to be what it is today, or did you get it all wrong?
I was on it actually. So I'm really boring, and I listened to Radio 4. So I don't know if you know Radio 4. Or
I
not.
don't know Radio 4.
So it's BBC. It's when you get really old and you start listening to Radio 4 in the UK and probably around the world. But and it's really informative, and it's quite political. And if I'm in my car, usually I've got Radio 4. So in January, when everything was kicking off in China, I was listening to a lot of reports. I've got like a friend of a friend was actually in China, and I shot him a message, "Hey, hope you're all right." So I was quite aware of it. And then what really hit me the most was when we met in London, and I saw people in the UK with masks on that day. So I flew to London and back in one day from Glasgow, and everything was in the news. We didn't know what was going to happen. We were like, 6 international people at a hotel in a boardroom in London, and we all had a slightly different story or a slightly different awareness. And even then we're like, okay, we're having this conversation about this customer, but is this really going to be put in place? Because we don't know what's about to happen in the world. So I think that was that time, maybe the start of March, when everyone knew there was something, but we didn't know how bad it was going to be. Are we going to have like a 2-week lockdown or a 3-week lockdown? Or are we going to have a lockdown? You know, that was a conversation maybe at the time. But yeah, I went to London with hand sanitizer and didn't want to touch anything in the public places and all that stuff. And I think I was already sort of personally locked down. I was already cancelling meeting friends, like at the last minute, pretending I was tired because I don't want to be in a public place. I think when you have a business as well, I really needed to protect myself. And that was how my thought process was. Maybe I didn't realize it at the time. So I was protecting myself in order to protect my business, because I knew if anything happened, I'm going to still have to run that business. But yeah, maybe what was it, like 2 or 3 weeks after that, I think the UK told hospitality outlets to close. So all bars, cafes, restaurants all had to close. That was, I think, around the 23rd of March. And that's when all went to shit in the UK. So all the cafes were closing and all of our orders stopped. And I remember having staff meetings every day, listening to the government updates every day, and not really knowing how I was going to pay everyone when I knew there weren't any orders coming in. So it's pretty full on.
For sure, right? And I think what you're saying initially as well about is, because when you run a business as well, as you say, like if we're not able to do that, then who will do that for us, right? And that, which is also really complicated. Plus, as one of the things that what we're challenged with as well, and any production company would be challenged with, is that can you use all of your team at the same time, or do you need to divide your team? Like, how do you? We've been hearing so many stories on these podcasts in terms of roasteries having to, split the team into groups, and they couldn't be in the roastery at the same time. And I mean, well, if we focus a bit here on the fact that you say, like, not knowing if you can actually pay your staff, like what actually goes through your head there? Because there's that kind of as an employer, that's a really tough thought process to go through, right? And I think it's a condition we want to avoid as much as we can, of course, right? But I mean, what went through your head there, and what actually was there a solution for that problem for the initial part of the lockdown as well? Or
I think, well, straight away, I'm a very ethical employer, so my staff were very people focused, and staff are important to me. The team are the business, so I think we were all sitting around the table and everyone's looking at me for an answer, and I knew I didn't have an answer. And that's hard. And you're sitting around the table with people who have children, who are saving for a house or deposit to buy their first property, or saving for a holiday or whatever it is. Everyone's got their own life, their own financial structure, their hopes, their dreams, and you're part of that to them. And you knowing you can't fulfill that is pretty stressful, but also everyone's looking at you almost as their provider, and you need to have an answer and to reassure them everything's going to be all right, when in actual fact none of us have experienced this situation ever in our lives. So what I did was guarantee everyone's job until the end of March on full pay. And then I guaranteed everyone's job in April, but no sort of designated pay structure or amount of days, perhaps reduced hours for everybody, but keeping everyone's job. And that then, with the suggestion, would reassess as we knew what would happen. And thankfully, we got a job retention furlough scheme in the UK. So immediately it was a relief because we could go, okay, we don't need all the staff. We can't afford them all. And there's a system in place from the government to finance their salary. So that's what we did. And rather than say, okay, you're on furlough and you're not, or whatever, I just offered it to everybody, because everyone had different levels of anxiety around coming to work, or their family situation if they have children, or seeing the bigger picture and knowing if they stayed there's more job security. And everyone had a different perspective. I gave everyone the option to get back to me over the weekend, and some people are walking out the door saying, I'll just leave the keys here. And others are like, I've got an email in my inbox before I even got home. So straight away, they took the furlough for their own reasons, and we've had job losses, and because we can't sustain all these, we're like predominantly a wholesale supplier to cafes, restaurants, bars. So that's probably like 90 to 95% of our business at the start of March. And straight away, we did exactly that. We moved into two teams. So we had two teams. There's the roastery staff, there's 6 of us. So we had 3 people in each day, alternate days, Monday to Saturday, and we're all off on Sunday. We had a separate coffee bar, which straight away was a different dilemma. We just had to monitor what was happening, and that's in a building that services art students and art studios and offices. So we had to be in line with what's happening in the building to continue to service them, but with, you know, taking precautions. So it was all a little bit tricky at the time. We got the job retention scheme, and then we just cranked the online ads because we had to find a revenue stream. We had to pay our rent. We had to meet our minimum costs. So all of our just outgoings, we cancelled all our non-essential spending. All these apps, you know, like all these apps you download and you're like, yeah, £2, £5, £10. And then you look at suddenly you're analysing everything down to the 1 pence, you know, like what are we spending? So we had just our essential costs, and then we just had to create projections based on that. So this is what we have to make to break even. And we've just taken every week by week, and like this is our minimum online target per day. And we just switch up our online ads to make sure we hit that, and all the other techniques that you use, like for search engine optimization and newsletters and all that kind of stuff. So that's been our strategy.
Yeah, and I think there's something I hear quite common within this podcast, and also talking with other people running roasteries, where we're clearly seeing a transition into online sales, right? Then I had some really interesting conversation, especially with for example, Stephen Layton, which is then obviously part of Has Been and kind of a big online e-commerce business to some degree, right? But he also made a pretty strong point there that online sales is great, and I think most roasteries, April included, has felt an increase in online sales during this time, right? But also it's become redundantly clear that it's not enough. As in the wholesale losses that also April has experienced to not as severe now as we feel that the business is coming back to some degree, even if it's far from predictions. But we still have definitely had a hard time going through that. And do you feel like how successful has that online process been for you guys?
Yeah, I think, you know, the likes of Has Been, they're well established online. I think we had everything in place, but we'd never really worked hard at it because we had our wholesale business and we were really busy. So because we were so busy, we're like, oh yeah, that's a little bonus so we get some online sales. And they were always increasing, and it was always a good part of our business, but it wasn't our main business. And then it just flipped overnight. So suddenly we're an online sales business, and we had to change how we did everything. So we had to change, just look at how efficient we were, you know, in terms of like labeling bags and how efficient is that? Stock rotation, like roasting smaller batches, roasting on, it's our 25 kilo behind us, but we've got our 5 as well. So roasting on a 5. And then some days there was only 2 of us in here, and I'd have 2 roasters on at once. You know, I got back into roasting, which I hadn't done for a while. So I'm like warming up the 25 while I'm doing some roasts on the 5. And then another order would come in. You're like, oh shit, we need to get the 5 back on. Or it was just all a bit of a jumble. And then you get into your flow, because you're trying to read what's going to happen, and what's happening online is different every day according to, I don't know, like what's happening in the world and what's happening locally. It's very localized because everyone was locked down. And then obviously postal service was a bit of a disaster in the UK. Obviously they were amazing at what they did, the job they did, but they weren't ready for it. So a lot of the mail was taking 10 days to get to someone who lived around the corner from the roastery. And we were refusing to let them come to the roastery because it's not an essential journey. You know, we're trying to follow the government guidelines as much as possible.
I think that's been, I heard some numbers. I think that was Tim Endebo in an earlier episode. I think he estimated a loss of around $7,000 based on lost shipments or coffee not arriving, sent out with standard post, right? And that's one of the things that we've been experiencing as well. Maybe not as severe, but it's been interesting because everyone is moving online. A lot of people are moving free shipping, and then all of a sudden the postal services more or less crashes, right? So it's I think for me it's going to be really interesting to see in a kind of a few months from now, where you sit down and you calculate the cost structures, the fulfillment cost, and all of this, to actually see if there was any money coming out of that.
Yeah, we were okay. We had some some bags that didn't make it to the customers and we'd resend, but our address is actually on our coffee bags, and quite often they just find their way back to us. So they'd like get lost in the postal system, and even if the envelope had burst or something, we got them back, and then we just give them, you know, it's product, so it's the cost price you're losing rather than the full retail price, I suppose. And we would just give it to people as a gesture, because obviously it's past our date. We would send it, we'd give it or want it to leave the roastery at. We can't resend it, especially if it's ground. That's a trend we found, actually. We sold way more ground coffee when we got to a point where we were like 5 or 10% of our online sales were ground coffee, and we were moving to actually just going beans only. We've been working at this for years just to make the decision and make the switch. Then suddenly we're like, you want us to grind the coffee? No problem. So that was a trend for us. It took us longer, but we got more sales because of it. And we did a lot more customer service as well, because people were bored at home and they just want to email and chat and, hi, how do we brew this? And you're like, okay, we're busting our ass getting all these bags and, you know, out the door every day, and then someone wants to chat about like email tennis, you know. So yeah,
it's been a very interesting process, right? And I think what I see is that a lot, as you mentioned as well, it's been going back to basics to some degree, right? And your experience with like you being back in the roastery, you roasting, and you know, those two staff, it's almost like, you know, the first time we started the businesses, more or less, right? Where it's like it's you and the roaster, and you're packing and shipping, and that's how it is, right? And that's you know, I'd like to always try to find some kind of positivity going through processes like this, even as, of course, it's an extremely challenging time, and a lot of negative things are coming out of it as well, right? On multiple levels, right? But there's also parts of it where there's an opportunity to kind of relearn, reassess, and rethink a lot of the things in the business as well, to come out stronger to some degree, right? Where are you guys today? Like, what is the current situation in the UK, and also for the roastery, and in terms of volumes and staff and
Yeah, I think, well, we're down to 5 full-time staff. We had 10 staff, not all full-time before, but we had 10, we've gone to 5. And yeah, I don't know how that's going to work going forward, but we're trying to stay very lean with our staffing, because we don't know what's going to happen every week. So right before this call, Scotland have had an announcement from Nicola Sturgeon, First Minister for Scotland, to say that we have a further lockdown to like public gatherings. So you can't have people in your house, and you can only meet outside with one other household. So this is a new regulation just from today, but also on top of that, there are little mini lockdowns throughout the country. So Glasgow, where I am, already had a further lockdown than the rest of Scotland, but not as bad as some areas in England. So yeah, we sort of, I think we were heading to a good situation, and now we're going a little bit backwards again. Hopefully it's because the government have learned a lesson from the first time. You know, I think we just had a staff meeting today as well, so we're having conversations where you have a monthly meeting, like, okay, what's happened this month, what have we learned, what do we need to do to help us next month. So today, you know, just discussing like all of these things, like what situations are going to put us at risk. Like, we've stopped doing barista training, we don't have anyone visiting our roastery. So if someone does visit our roastery, then if they've been anywhere where they've been in contact with anyone who's tested positive, is that putting the future of this roastery at risk? Do we have to close then? We don't know, because actually the guidelines they're not very clear, and they can be manipulated. But also from a humanitarian perspective, I don't want the staff to be at risk. So it's really hard because you want to help your customers and you want to make life as easy for your customers and you want to maintain the relationships and the sales. But ultimately you can't have the sales if you don't have a team and you can't, you can't have the customers if you don't have a team to help you service them. So yeah, it's kind of tricky. We're in a situation now where I'm really proud of the team. I'm really proud of where we've got to. We lost, like 90% of the business overnight in March. And now we're down a Jaraboo, 100% transparent about it. Like we're down 29% for the year in total. And that's because we've maintained our online sales trajectory that we've had since March, but also because our wholesale has come back and we have got lots of wonderful, loyal customers. And it's been really heartwarming to see them all open their doors and see their business come back to some form of normality where they can move forward. And we just got to keep on top of everything every day and keep looking at projections. And we've been we had an organic growth since day one. We started off coffee maybe at the right time. And we're all really ambitious and, so in here. So I think trying to keep that positivity whilst looking out for one another and managing all sorts of stuff like mental health of everybody and everyone's personal family circumstances. I think everyone's on their own wave of feeling good today, feeling bad today, or it's kind of tough. But I think having somewhere to come to work and feel safe and to know that we have something positive happening here and having lovely feedback about our coffee is a nice thing. So we're just continuing as much as we can to keep going forwards and managing every situation and seeing every opportunity. We got our coffee into veg boxes that get delivered to people's homes, and we just trying to find other ways, other business opportunities, and also buying really amazing coffee. Having a bit more time to do that, to be honest, for me.
Where, if we focus a bit on the buying part of coffee, because it's something that as a roastery owner becomes really interesting. And we talk to exporters here, we talk to farmers, we talk to importers, we talk to a bunch of roasteries, and it's such a different, diverse range of approaches here. Whereas we see canceling projects, contracts, we see again some roasteries buying more coffees. Where are you guys? Because within a specialty coffee, of course, one of the things we as roasteries communicate quite strongly is that the relationship with the producers we buy from, and the continuity in that and sustainability of how we do that. And how have you guys been affected on the green coffee side specifically?
I think, so in March, everyone panicked and bought toilet roll. And I panicked and I bought loads of green coffee because so like I said, I kind of predicted the lockdown, I think, before anyone else was really talking about it a whole lot. So yeah, I just stocked up because I thought if traffic is not allowed to move, if there are roadblocks, I was thinking disaster situation, So we got lots of green coffee in stock so that if anything happened, we could still roast and supply. I didn't really predict the hospitality shutdown, to be honest. I thought maybe it'd be a different kind of lockdown, but then it did get to a point where I was like, oh, we're not going to be able to get through a lot of coffee we have contracted, but also we've run out. I think the timing for the coffee calendar was quite interesting, possibly in very positive and very negative ways. So in a positive way, we were at the end of contracts, really. So we're trying to get through the last of our Guatemala that we'd had for a year. Our Colombia had a couple of months left, and our Brazil is the biggest one, I think, for all roasteries. So that's the only contract we still have an overstock of Brazil, but we don't have the next crop landed yet. So we're still trying to get through that. Maybe we will, maybe we won't, but that's the only one that I've kind of stuck with. And we've worked with this farm for maybe 7 years, something like that. So I really want to make sure that we get through the coffee and then make an order again, and we will. I'm positive I'm going to make it happen. But from the other point of view, we couldn't get some coffees that we wanted to get. So Ethiopia was really tricky. So we finished our Ethiopian coffees, and you know, we're still trying to get some coffees through the links that we have. We've got a lot of loyal relationships. I think everyone does. You have your partnerships you've worked with for a long time and people you trust. So yeah, we went through like a different sack of Ethiopia every other week, and from a different washing station. So, but we had to, because our customer demand was online and more single origin focused. So it's actually kind of interesting that you're getting to do something you really love. You're actually getting to taste way more coffees. So we were buying like tables every week of cupping tables. And you know, that had another layer of complexity as well, because we want to have, you know, at least more than one cup if you're doing a buying decision, preferably 5, obviously. But we want to have 2 people cupping to discuss the coffees together. So you're not going to have 10 cups. So trying to just have at least 2 each. So we're having to ask suppliers for, you know, more green than they'd usually send in a sample, so that we could have that on the table. And finding the time to do that when we've been in here from 7 in the morning, roasting, packing, deadlines for the courier, deadlines for the postman, like all this stuff. So we've got to a point now where we've secured a lot of coffee. We've got some really interesting coffees come. I've gone out of maybe I was in a structure that I had created for the business that I hadn't realized, where I was like, we've got our Colombian, we've got our Brazilian, we've got our Guatemalan. I would just sort of tick boxes, and also try and, you know, buy for the year. And now I'm speaking to some people where like importers that maybe I haven't worked with before, and taking the time to find out about their traceability information, to start working to form some new relationships while still honouring all the people who've been loyal to me over the years as well. So yeah, it's been quite nice actually, to really look at some micro lots that we can work with, and something we can work with in the future to move forward as well. So buying from them for the first time to create a new like sustainability project for the business and for them. Yeah, but then other stories of, do you want this coffee? We need to know now, because we need to know whether to prepare it for specialty or not. So that further preparation method that happens at origin, and do they have the amount of people to be able to do that? Because their spike came after ours in producing countries. So I don't know how that's going to affect everything going forward. We just have to stay aware and be prepared. I think you can hit us with anything now after what we've gone through. It's how I feel, but
yeah, for sure. I mean, it's as you say, like there's a few things there that I like to pick up on that I think is really interesting. First of all, what you say about the timing on green coffee, which is actually quite interesting, and for the people listening in here as well that may not be as in tune with the kind of coffee harvesting cycle as we are, is that we actually had a lot of countries that were finished picking, they finished at least wet milling, maybe they were still dry milling, basically autumn or late autumn time. But we actually had, it actually hit us, I would like to argue, in the perfect time. As in, it's like a lot of contracts, as you say, were fulfilled. And we were sure some people had signed new ones, but we hit us at a time where we could foresee to some degree and make some changes to kind of remain sustainable, right? I'm very curious what's going to happen, and that's a conversation for another time. But we have Brazil coming up, and the Brazil harvest, as we all know, dictates the commercial market to a large extent, which also then is going to dictate the specialty market for 2021. So I'm very curious to see what will happen with the coffee market at large now, right? We hit all-time low last year, and I'm very curious what will happen, especially 2021. 2020 seems to be predictable so far, right? But it's it's interesting to see. One of the things you say as well is that you have an opportunity to reassess some stuff, to watch. Okay, these are the practices we have done so far, and again, it's important to link back to the fact that any kind of disruption, even one as unwanting as this one, is still an opportunity, right? To see your company from new perspectives, right? So I'm pessimistic in the sense that I think this is going to go on for a very long time. I think we have, there's some people on this podcast that predicted 2 years until market stabilizes. I will probably be one of them, as in I don't see a solution anytime soon. And as you mentioned in Glasgow, and we have the same in Copenhagen today, where we have further quarantines and going kind of back to that kind of late fall period. But it's also important that we take the time to actually make something out of this and see something positive, right? And reform the structures of the businesses. And one of the things I'm interested to discuss a bit, and that's mainly because I'm very much in it myself, because April as a roastery is also very much a wholesale roastery, and have businesses start as well, right? But one of the questions that I'm starting to hear in our part of the industry is whether it's going to be sustainable in the future to build a roastery on wholesale. Is wholesale dead, for lack of a better term? I mean, of course, it's going to be around to some capacity, right? But would you actively restructure your business for the future as well, to try to kind of hone in on different revenue points?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, right now, I'm just relying on online to cover the cost of the business. So what we get on wholesale is a bonus right now. But the balance is tipped, but it could tip the other way next month. So it's like running two businesses simultaneously. And then it's, working out, we've got our packing area. So we're like, should we split that packing area into wholesale and retail? Should we have certain hours of the day that are just wholesale or retail? But then the next week, something new happens and we're like, no, we can't really do that. So, we've got a kind of structure to the day. We've got deadlines for Royal Mail collecting, and it's really, really difficult. I'm doing all the deliveries as well. So I'm a delivery girl now, but I love it. So that's fine. So I get to see all the customers, but I could do the deliveries in 1 hour 3 months ago, and now it's like 4 hours, and Glasgow's pretty small. So I can like zoom around and kind of see everyone. I think, we have some incredible customers that didn't close for 1 day, and they did takeaway right the way through lockdown. And their volumes were, more than they'd ever, of coffee that went through was more than what they ever had done before. And then as the lockdown eased, other places open, and then their volumes went back to what they were before. We've some businesses have closed, and some are only just opening like now. They've been closed since March. It's really hard to put a figure on or a prediction on any sort of trends in wholesale, because it's government controlled and it's specific to each business and how well the business was run, what their financial situation was at the time of the lockdown, how many staff they had, and their commitments to their staff and their salary bill, and their location actually. So if they're in a city centre, very difficult to reopen. If they reopen, are they going to cover their costs? It's very difficult to know. Whereas in residential areas, everyone's happy because people are at home, then they're going out for coffee because they need to get out of their house. So yeah, if you're going to start a wholesale roastery, make sure all your customers are in residential areas. That's my only words of wisdom, I think. Yeah. But I don't think wholesale's dead. I'm not with you there, Patrick.
No. I mean, believe me when I say that I'm hoping the people that claim this are wrong, right? Because I mean, of course, people are. There's a lot of arguments to be made. I mean, humans are social animals. We've always been. We've gone through historically pandemics and other challenges, and if anything, what we can see after a situation like this is usually a spike, like a positive spike, in the sense that, you know, we all want to socialize, we want to go to our coffee shops, we want to travel, you know, stay at hotels. I think there's something that is just inherently human today, right? So I think in the longer perspective, I'm quite positive, right? And I'm 100% agreeing with the pitch as well, where it's like the neighborhood shops some of them have gone through this stronger than ever before, right? We see it very clearly in Copenhagen. I see it with the wholesale customers April has around the world. If you are, the smaller the place you're in, the more your sales have been the last few months, which is really interesting, right? So rather than an end of wholesale, we're going to see a shift in location of wholesale, perhaps, right? No, that very, very interesting process, I think, in general. I want us to, before we wrap this conversation up, I want to be mindful of your time. A bit of prediction, which I know it's difficult, but I still like to ask it, like, what is coming up? Like, what do you think 2021 especially kind of has in store for us? Does it make a point to have a prediction now, or is it just all wait and see, or what would you like to happen?
I think it's definitely still the unknown. You know, there's some sort of adrenaline about having to think on your feet every week. And I think if you started a business, you've already been a risk taker and you maybe already like that adrenaline. So I don't know, from my point of view, I'm just trying to stay well informed and trying to, you know, there's so much stuff online right now, and it's knowing what to listen to, which is relevant and has, you know, that is communicating the information that we need in order to make good decisions to move forward. I think there is a trend for people, you know, like drinking more coffee at home. Maybe in Copenhagen it's always been quite normal, but in Glasgow maybe it's a bit new. Maybe people are experimenting also with, I'm going to try different single origins, because before I bought the supermarket coffee, like fresh coffee, if you can say that, from the supermarket, but now I'm going to get it from a roaster, and now I'm going to try different origins from the roaster, and now I'm going to maybe, you know, invest a bit more in that. I'm willing to go up that price scale because now I understand coffee and I'm getting excited by it and interested in it. So I think the market for specialty actually is there and is growing. It's still a small market, but there's more of a crossover with the mainstream market now. What I have noticed is some companies that I've been following, they're pitching more to a mainstream market. They're maybe starting to roast darkly when they didn't before, because they can see that's maybe a buzz description that mainstream customers of the market are going to want. In terms of coffee from origin, I'm worried. I'm worried about the origin countries. I usually travel a lot, and I haven't traveled this year, which has been really nice for me, to be honest. I've quite liked being grounded, but I really feel that distance from the farms and that connection. For the update of my knowledge, and for me to bring that knowledge back to my team and to, you know, my customers. So that's just my personal connection, but there's going to be that for every roastery that visits origin, and also for every coffee farmer and exporter who usually has that connection maybe with the Western world, or the buyers and what they're looking for in the coffees. I don't know, that's just me thinking out loud, but
no, I think that's a very strong point, and I think basically everyone I talked to so far on this podcast have, you know, a very similar experience, and I think for a lot of us, at least myself, I get a lot of my energy from, you know, 1 or 2 trips early in the year to some of my favorite farmers, right? Because there's a level of, you know, an inspiration there, and I think in the very foundation of what we do is the farmer, right? There's no way around that. So I think that's really important. I think that's it goes in both ways, because I also hear people discussing, well, we can do, we had Nadine on from Primavera earlier in the podcast as well, and we were discussing, virtual visits to the farms. And I mean, that's really interesting, right? And that something positive can come out of that. We all travel too much. It's not good for the environment. We know that as well. So there's interesting things that can come out of this, but there's also a very real sensation that I think specialty coffee is where it is today because of the relationships we have with the farmers. And I think that's very, very difficult to get online in the same way. You might be able to maintain that relationship, but kind of putting the seeds in for it and allowing it to grow requires us to actually meet. So it's going to be interesting to see what comes out of that. And also a very interesting point, I heard what you mentioned there about the some roasteries are kind of, we're switching up the products to maybe then, meet a different market. And I think that's really interesting, where I'm predicting a kind of fundamental change in how the specialty coffee scene will be structured. And I think we're going to see a lot of kind of different versions of specialty, like a segmentation within the specialty coffee industry, which I think already before this year has started, right? Whereas it's not just commodity and premium is specialty, or whatever you want to call it. It's going to be specialty, and then we have a bunch of different tiers within specialty, right? Which is also going to be interesting to see. I'm not really sure how that's going to affect the industry, but it's fair to say that the industry will not be the same moving forward, right?
I think so. It's going to be like pre-pandemic, post-pandemic conversations. I feel lucky I've had the opportunity to travel. I feel lucky I've done my Q grader. I feel lucky I've done I'm sensory AST. I've done all of these things already. So I feel like in terms of running a roastery, I've got all the tools and the experiences. So I have integrity in what I can talk about for the coffee industry with my customers, and I can communicate the right message. If it's new roasteries, they haven't got that behind them, and maybe they won't have that opportunity going forward. So there's going to be an element of the companies who have that and who haven't, and you really want you want the industry to progress. You want people to go to Origin. You want baristas to go to Origin. You want all of these things, like the SCA, like all the classes that they do, barista training. We're not doing it right now. I don't know if any other roasteries are. I need to check that out and maybe chat to some more people about it. I've chatted to some people already to understand how they're thinking about it. It's nice to talk to other business owners and be collaborative in our thoughts to find out a way forward. So are there going to be less people trained as baristas? What's the standard of coffee making going to become? There's what coffees are we going to get as well, and the preparation methods, if there's not as many people at Origin, if they have a spike in cases in their area. The export, is the coffee going to export on time? Is there going to be a delay in exports, or further checks to do when it arrives, when it goes through all the checkpoints it has to? There's so many things to think about, because our industry is already multi-layered and it already has this very complex supply chain, right from picking that cherry to someone taking their first sip of coffee. So it's something that we have to understand, and I think I feel really grateful of where my business is at right now, because I feel we have solid foundations and we can sort of weather the storm. And if it comes to it, I can run the business on my own, because I did in the beginning, and that's how I feel. Although I'm probably not being realistic. My team would say that's absolute nonsense. So, but I think it's just determines people and ambitious people to try and keep the industry going and to keep it with the same momentum that it had, because it was going really fast before. So that's how I feel. And I love this industry, so I'm not going to let it go.
No, I'm really happy to hear that, and I think that's also it's a great way to sum this conversation up as well. I mean, I think we're thankful to be at a place as an industry where we're developed enough to have and you and other people in it that are going to make sure that we get out on a positive side, right? And I think that's so important, because if this happened 5 years ago, let's say 5 years ago, I think we would seen a very different realization, right? Because a lot of the companies that have kind of created the foundation of this industry wouldn't have been in a place where that foundation is as stable, right? So I'm arguing that Specialty Coffee is in a position where we are going to be able to prevail in this, right? Because we have the individuals, we have the companies, we have a transparent and to some degree sustainable value chain that could be improved, right? But I'm really excited to see what comes up. I'm excited to follow you guys to see what's happening as well. And I want to thank you a lot for taking the time to be a part of this podcast as well. Yeah,
Thanks for inviting me. I'm happy to be here and happy to chat to you. But yeah, it's always nice to chat to other people in the industry, and that's what I'll always do, because that's what will keep us all grounded and that's what will move us forward. So thank you very much.
Super. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening. This project has been brought to you by April Media, which is an unfiltered view on the coffee industry powered by our Patreon supporters. We would love it if you share these episodes, subscribe to our channels, and if you want to be a part of building this, please join our Patreon. Thank you again.